Hi and good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you may be. Welcome to the Tech Communications at a Time of Crisis APAC Perspective webinar. My name is Mariel. I'm part of the PRCA APAC Tech group, and we're really excited to have you here with us. So some of you may already be aware of the PRCA APAC Tech group, but I thought I'd give you a bit of background. Our group aims to support members working in the B2B and B2C sectors, technology sectors, through sharing best practices, facilitating opportunities to network and learn. And we're open to technology brands from startups, consumer brands, B2B brands, as well as agencies. And our goal is really to draw on industry experts and share our insights, share our experience with each other. So today, we're here to learn about how to handle a crisis, specifically in the telecom sector. We know, crises, they're the ultimate proving ground, and handling them well really takes your experience, skills, and guts as well. So today, we have our panelists here who will share with us their experience. We have Grace Chung, editor and co-founder, News on Tech, and contributing editor, Tech Gundu, as our moderator for today. So she will lead our discussion, and we really hope that this will be a fruitful discussion for everyone and we can all learn from each other. So Grace, I'm handing it over to you. Let's start the discussion.
Right, thanks, Meryl. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. There are some familiar names, so hello. Welcome to this interesting discussion on tech communications crisis. My name is Grace Chung. I'm an editor of News on Tech, and I've been doing journalism for a very long time. For those celebrating Chinese New Year, I wish all of you a great year of abundance, especially abundantly good media coverage and good customer reviews. I think we all need it, right? Well, as a journalist, death and destruction make good news. So broadly, this covers anything that causes disruption, threatens stability and status quo, and which results in economic and market shifts. More importantly, they also impact your customers, impact corporate branding and reputation. These are all high-stake events for PR, whether you're in-house or whether you're a consultant. And the crises are made complex by geopolitics, security breaches, fake videos, right? So tech has become ubiquitous. So good and bad events in tech go global instantly. So today's discussion of tech communications at a time of crisis, the Asia perspective, is timely. The aim is to distill the best practices and tips from facing crises, from experience with extensive, from people with extensive experience in communications. So I'm delighted to moderate this event. Together with me today, Serene Koh, Director of Communications at Asia Thales. Wave to us, Serene. And she has over 20 years of work experience working in France, Belgium, and Singapore, with expertise in corporate reputation management, crisis communications, and of course, PR. Shamin Alia Jassal hails from Australia. She is Director of Corporate Communications Asia Pacific and Japan for Palo Alto Networks, also with extensive experience building communications, branding, and marketing frameworks. Neil Murano, whom I discovered have moved to Canberra, is Director of Client Services and Partner at RISE. He has many years of experience in PR, reputation management, and crisis management. So welcome, Neil, Serene, and Charmaine. As you bring your insights into how to craft impactful messages. Let's start with the basics. Serene, you have worked across the world. So maybe you can share with us what are the essential components of a crisis comms plan for tech companies?
So a crisis comms plan, and this need not necessarily be confined to a tech company, because Thales operates as a deep tech company, but providing tech for very critical sectors. So we are working largely with a lot of institutional customers. You're talking ministries, governments, regulators, operators. We are not necessarily on the front line of a crisis because our brand is not as visible, but we are inextricably linked with our customers when they face a crisis.
Right.
So what I think we tend to do is have a very, very strong playbook and a framework that we can fall back on. Because for a tech company like Thales, heavily engineering focused, the focus when it comes to a crisis is a lot on business continuity. You know, how do we get our things up and running back for the customer?
Yeah.
But alongside that, as a comms practitioner in-house, this business continuity plan has to be complemented by a pretty robust crisis framework that you set in place. And that means developing trust and aligning with a lot of stakeholders, whether it's internal, external, and including the media as well. But it's not only isolated to the media.
Right. Shamin, what's the top 2 things that you will put into this comms crisis playbook?
Oh, well, the playbook, it can be as thin and as thick as you'd like it to be, but in my personal experience, and I've written a few of them in my life, in my professional journey, is definitely have a chain of command. So the right people to speak to and call when a crisis occurs. So you know who the right people to be. So it's literally your war room. And of course, have pre-written responses, and this can be to, like Serene said, the various stakeholders. So it's always good to spend some time. I know we were all very busy as comms professionals, but you do need to carve out time to speak to, first of all, the leaders in your business, legal team, marketing, and other stakeholders which you think is relevant, who are business decision makers. Those are the escalation points, and spend time running through different scenarios that you label, or the business labels, as a crisis, and have pre-written responses, whether it's for external stakeholders and internal stakeholders. And that allows you to have exactly what a playbook is supposed to be, a fallback position to allow you to start from somewhere as opposed from zero. And as a comms professional, that allows you to speak with authority, and also with some level of experience to actually ensure that your stakeholders trust where you're coming from. Because not everybody walks into a role with experience in crisis. That takes years of experience where you build it out. So yeah, I think those are the things that definitely are the key things that you should have. And also everyone's phone numbers. You forget. You might have someone's email address, but you don't have a phone number. That if it's crises always happen at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. I don't know why. So that's just how it is. So you need everyone's phone numbers as well. And most recently, sorry to go on about this, but communication within the team is really important. So recently, I've also set up a WhatsApp communications group. So for my key stakeholders that I've identified to be the key people to make decisions during a crisis. So that helps too.
Okay, that's good. Neil, anything to add?
No, I think the one thing that I'd say is, as an agency, it's also important to establish that line of trust with the clients, because in such a crisis situation, what you want is really information. You want to know as much as you can so that you can react in a way that you think would be strategic to the client. But often a lot of these conversations are very internal. So you got to get the client's trust to tell you, give you a bigger picture story so that you put yourself in a situation that you could really help them. So I'd emphasize that point on trust.
Okay, that's a good segue for me, because as a journalist, I'm always interested in the good, bad, and the ugly, right? So everything in a crisis, from the how, when, who, and what happened, I would want to know. So as I value this information, I also value transparency and honesty, right? And to a very large extent, authenticity as well. So Neil, from an agency perspective, what advice would you give to how much information to disclose during a crisis?
Yeah, I think fundamental will be, I guess, again, the truth, because especially at this date in day and age, like, information could be coming from anywhere. Social media is very active.
Right.
Um, media, you have all your sources, well-established sources, and news breaks in a snap. And so I think truth is fundamental. And I do acknowledge though that certain situations, you got to take a measured approach because there's a lot of stakeholders that you work with. And so sometimes there are truths that you know at the moment, but that could just be a hard, a half-baked truth. So you also got to try to, know the full picture as you try to gather more information. So it's a tricky um thing to navigate. It's never easy, but you know, I think alignment with stakeholders on, what findings you've got at that moment, and dedicate milestones that you could, decide altogether that, hey, this is the conclusion we've had at this moment, and this is what we're telling the public in the situation where we're talking to the media, for example.
Okay, Serene, what's your perspective on this?
Well, as a company that works primarily with government, I think there are a lot of instances where we are contractually embargoed to not be able to talk about the crisis.
Yeah.
And that is just, the nature of the business. And if you talk about certain types of crisis, for example, in the area of cyber, things like hackers, breaches, things like that, most of the time our customers don't really want to talk about it that much. They don't want to draw too much attention. And similarly, we've got to align with that. We're not going to throw them under the bus, and we're not just going to try and make a bigger crisis out of everything else. I think the focus many times is for us to stay fixed on fixing the problem. Engineers are working round the clock to get things back up and running for them so it doesn't blow further.
So in my experience, cybersecurity is a very hard topic to cover. I can't be forever writing about the new products that come out, and neither can I be writing about the good things that are happening, because nobody wants to talk about what I am doing. No customer wants to talk about, I am implementing this, for fear that I am opening myself up to attacks. And then on the other hand, when you have an attack, you want to say that I'm attacked. So what is this, what kind of balance? Shamin, can you throw some light on this?
So this is where a crisis becomes a catastrophe if you don't have a crisis comms playbook, right? And I think one of the examples that come to mind is, a few years ago, one of the telcos in Australia had a data breach. First of all, they were a little bit slow to admit. And this is when misinformation spreads. You've got citizen journalists have social media as a platform to spread, crazy theories. I wouldn't say crazy, I take that back. Theories that they've come up with. And that's where misinformation spreads. So to be on the front foot, I think the honesty part that Neil talked about is incredibly important. And what you said earlier about authenticity, so it's being on the front foot, being authentic. If you don't have all the information, and if you're being asked by the public through social media channels, and if you're being called on the phone by a journalist, what you should do is buy some time. And I say this with a pinch of salt because buying time is different from delaying a response. So buying time means when a journalist calls, what you say is, I don't quite have all the information right now, but if you hold the story for 60 minutes, I will get back to you. And then you get back to them. And I think that's incredibly important, that time factor. And the message that you craft should be simple language, short and sweet, to the point. And I think the public appreciates that.
Okay. So far we have been talking about, fake videos, breaches, and so on. But what about a whistleblower? They can also cause a crisis, whether the whistleblower is giving the right information or giving the wrong information. How would you, handle this? Anybody? Serene?
I think the imperative is still to go back to verify facts. Ultimately, there are many sectors we operate in, right? And some of them can be fairly divisive topics. defense, for example, very contentious. So, of course, there have been occasions where news has leaked out on a particular incident or another, on a case, and the usual source of response for us is to still go back internally, verify the facts with our partners, our stakeholders, customers, align with them first on what we can or cannot say. I would never actually go all out there to refute a claim directly without doing any sort of due diligence. And being in the industry that we are in for defense, we tend to err on the side of caution. We tend to be fairly conservative in how we approach this as well. So,
okay. Neil, anything to add?
No, I'd say that this is where what we talked about, having a playbook, being proactive when it comes to situations like this, so that we already know that this is going to happen, right? And so based on certain, the whistleblower can be talking about various things, right? And based on how we map certain issues that could be associated with a company, then we know which spokesperson would have to respond to this particular scenario. So I think it all leads back to preparedness. And the reality, though, is as much as we want to say we want to be proactive, sometimes it's just not always the priority. And so it's just a reminder for us to be thinking of, crisis situations in the future and being a step ahead so that it doesn't happen.
Yeah, so we have, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add on that because and take it maybe a couple of steps back and maybe ask you a question, Grace, as a journalist. A whistleblower would call, let's say, a journalist to share juicy secrets. I think with responsible journalism, you'd say, hold the phone, and then you would do your fact checks first. And I think in that sense, you'd call the organization involved, speak to them, and give them a chance to respond before the story goes out. So I think the playbook allows the comms person in the organization to prepare a statement, and the journalist also has that responsibility to ensure that a whistleblower is not just vying for attention, and that there is basis to that story.
Right, yeah. So we have established that it is important to have a playbook. That playbook actually maps out what the step-by-step things that you should do. You should have a list of people stakeholders that you go to for responses, their phone numbers, and try and avoid at 4 p.m. on a Friday, you are rushing around, who's going to tell me what. So all of this should be in a playbook ready for you to pull out when the crisis happens. I want to talk about how technology has helped or made it more difficult for you to do your work in a crisis. I'm thinking about social media and how fast it moves, right? It moves at atomic speed. By the time you can think about this question, already something else has happened. So how do you use technology to help you in your work? Charmaine, you want to go first?
I love technology. I've been in tech for the last 25 years. And so I'm a gadgets girl, and that's why I've been in technology for so long. And I think technology enables life to be easier and better. And I think it's a great segue from the previous discussion. Technology is used in this way to create listening tools. So media monitoring, social listening tools. Those are the first things that you ought to put in place when something like a crisis hits the news, or you get wind of something happening, so you have listening tools. So that's how we use technology.
It's also a way for you to distribute your information.
Indeed, the internet is, like you said, the technology moves at an atomic speed, as you said, and at the same way, we can actually maybe solve a crisis at an atomic speed because of technology.
Okay, Serene?
I think tools or technology tools, for example, AI, it's a tool. I wouldn't call it a solution, but definitely a tool. And for us, a key part when they have a crisis is, of course, all the listening, monitoring, that we rely quite a bit on our agency partners to help, especially when resources internally are tight. I think they can certainly help with putting a ear out there, listening to sentiment, gathering information, collating it, making sense of it in a faster speed. But especially in a crisis, when you're crafting responses, statements, people are looking for authenticity and security.
Right.
People want you to come from a place of empathy, and I don't think AI can do all of that.
Right.
It can do it well, certainly, but it cannot replicate the tone of voice for my boss, who I know after writing his speeches for the last 5 years.
Right. So how would you go out? How would you use the technology? Not necessarily AI, but would you use social media, YouTube, broadcast your messages, but, showing the face of the company?
We would do it carefully, I think. We do have certain social platforms that we use, mostly LinkedIn. We use X as well. Our spokespeople can be occasionally a bit shy, but I think it's important for them to go out there and relay the message. So I think getting them help and training periodically, as well as just before they need to go out there, is important. And we've done that when we've had a crisis. We've had a trusted trainer come on board literally half an hour before the press conference, to walk them through.
So I'm sure, and I'm sure this should also be in the playbook, that you would rehearse some of these things, right? So you have a war room and you would rehearse some of the answers and responses, right?
Okay, so let me give you a bit of what's in the playbook or framework. So you've got your list of context, you've got a decision tree, you've got sometimes in a past organization I've worked with, there's an automated trigger of phone calls that automate. Do you remember the good old days of pages?
Yes.
Very long ago, right? Everybody gets a page,
Yes.
They all get summoned to the
The vibration in your pocket, yes.
Exactly, and it's not for fun, right?
Yeah.
So, and then more importantly in the playbook is a definition of roles and responsibilities, right? Who does what? Who's the chief? Who's the main spokesperson? Rather than, everybody going out there saying different things. And then there's alignment on messages. There's prep. We do drills as well, as much as we can, right? For situations we think we can control. But sometimes it just goes pear-shaped as well.
Okay, Neil, from the agency perspective, you have to step in and advise the in-house PR. What would be the first two things you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, in relation to technology, I think one other point I'd like to make is how, the time now is different in such a way where gone were the days that, when we want our voice to be heard out there, it's primarily like mass media that we rely on. I think now is a good time where brands have the opportunity to kind of own their voice, because you know how sometimes the risk is, you respond to questions and media might interpret things the way they interpret things, or it's also based on other sources that they looked into. Right now, I think there's an incredible opportunity for us to share our story from our own channels, for channels that we own. I think that's quite unique, and that's something that I could talk to my clients about in terms of sharing a response at the time of crisis, for example.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions from the audience. One is how to balance open communication and legal restrictions. Actually, there are two questions there. Often legal is very careful, right? And I've experienced that in the legal team before when I was writing a story on data protection. They are always adamant about not saying sorry because that is saying that you have committed something. So what is the balance? You need open communications and legal restrictions. How do you do that? Jami?
Oh, I think, well, it's always a conversation. That's why you need to be very good friends with the general counsel in your organization.
Be good friends. Okay.
Yeah, you gotta have good relationships. I think relationships internally and externally are very important. I think a lot of times it's about it's honesty. So if you've made a mistake, I think you should admit to the mistake. Maybe using the word sorry is something that the legal department might say you shouldn't, because then you're down the road, you'll be open to being sued. I think that's why the legal department doesn't want you to say sorry. But admitting that a mistake has happened, it's nuance, right? It's how you write these things out. And I think you can work it out between the legal department and this is why A playbook is incredibly important, taking time to run drills like Serene was saying earlier, and coming up with the different scenarios. One of the other things that I must say is, or I should say, is that you should partner with a good crisis comms or agency to help you craft these messages, because an external voice or external eyes a lot of times is able to be objective and help you navigate through these things.
Okay. Serene?
It is an ongoing discussion with our legal team. It's not only legal, it's also HR. Because one thing that people sometimes tend to forget is in a crisis, you also do have the employees in the company.
Right.
As an audience that we shouldn't really forget, right? Because they are impacted and they have families who are, giving them questions about the organization or the company they're working for.
Yep.
So I think it's okay to have a good relationship with legal to be able to craft the messages with honesty and not be overly robotic about it. There has been a past incident where TELUS has come out and said the word sorry in public, and it's not an admission of liability. It's a heartfelt apology that one of our senior leadership made in full view of the public.
Right. Neil?
Yeah, I think the time of crisis and when dealing with legal, I think as let's say looking at myself as the external agency for my clients, I think that legal line is tricky to get into, right? Because what's not legal is something you don't want to cross, right? But I think our role is okay. This is where experience comes into play because it's up for us to present scenarios, right? Crisis is never easy, and so there are different decisions that we have to make. It's just sometimes maybe we take the less risky route, but it's up for us to present, okay, if we go this way, this is the repercussion, and based on experience is the damage that it could take. So it's presenting those scenarios and taking the collective decision based on all of that. It's not just the PR decision. It will be joint with legal, upper management, and everyone involved.
Okay, here's a question on does it warrant calling a press conference to explain a crisis situation? Because most of the time it seems that the communication is in writing. So as a journalist, I would always prefer that it is face-to-face. Someone comes up to explain what is happening, rather than coming out with a statement which is very bald, right? It just states everything there and there's no face to the company. And so I would always prefer a face-to-face explanation. But from the perspective of companies, what is it that you would do, Charmaine?
Do we still do press conferences, or is it just for governments?
There are some press conferences.
I mean, nobody has time now to go anywhere, right? I mean, yes, a face-to-face is great. You could offer an exclusive, a one-on-one, or even a one-to-many. We live in a very virtual world. Like today, we're here on Zoom, right? So I think if it does also depend on the level of crisis and who you work for, and and which organization we're talking about. So I think that if it's a large consumer brand, a face-to-face is definitely useful. But there is some, I don't know, I'm sure everybody here has seen a Boeing CEO talking about layoffs, and that's a playbook on what not to do. And so you do need to ensure that the executive that you put in front, the spokesperson that you put in front for the face of the company, has to be someone who's media trained and is comes across as trustworthy. As Serene said, she had someone come in and media train someone 30 minutes before. So there's lots of different components to think about. But I think that's a long response to your question. But the short answer is yes.
Right.
Helpful, yes.
So it is important, and I think the drills and the briefings before you appear in a face-to-face is really important, right, Serene? So you would advise that we need to practice the responses first before you put this person in front of a camera or in front of your stakeholder.
Oh, yeah, I would do that. And even in good times, right? Even if it wasn't a crisis, I would still put my spokesperson through a bit of training and make sure they were comfortable going up. And now, if you're talking bad news, yeah, you definitely need some support on that. But to your question, Grace, on whether press conference versus written, normally now in the sector I work in, the press conferences normally would be called by the government stakeholders or the institutional stakeholders. And if they do require the support and presence of a partner or a supplier, then we are on hand to be there with them if they need to.
Okay, so this is a little bit of a fine point, this question. It says, exposing a spokesperson represents a risk of them becoming the face of a particular crisis situation. What is the playbook for having a leader deliver a message versus a company-signed communication? A slight twist on what we've been speaking about. Neil?
Yeah, I think there's value in terms of putting a face to the communications because, I mean, at the end of the day, we're communicating to humans. And so, in a situation where we want to demonstrate empathy, that we really care, that we are sorry, that has to come across. And sometimes it wouldn't if it's just a written communications. So that's pretty important. And I think for the most part, senior leadership executives would know that that's part of their responsibility. And so it's part of what we do as comms people, where, we prepare them for situations like this.
And I
Okay,
think
sorry.
I'll just say, I think leaders, like to Neil's point, leaders now, business leaders, CEOs, MDs, whatever you want to call them, they know that's part of their role to front the organization.
Right, okay. So
And
I have
Grace,
a
if
question.
it's not 100% press conference, very visible to the public, what also helps is if the comms person like myself has a trusted relationship with a couple of journalists
Yeah.
who that will tell and report fairly and impartially on your side of the story. You could organize something like a one-on-one just to give them the extent of what you can deliver.
What about background briefings? Is that useful? Do not report, but I can brief you and give you more information. What about that kind of approach? Anyone?
I have done that before in a previous organization, and it has proven to be useful. It does buy you more time because you provided them with information for them to go and do some more investigation. And sometimes the story doesn't even come out because the journalist has read through the information and understood what's going on, and there's no story.
Okay. Neil, is that useful in your experience? Do you recommend this to your clients?
It depends on a case to case basis. If it's if it's something that's investigative in nature, similar to what Charmin has shared, and it's something that contributes to the good of the public information, then yeah, it could be. So yeah, I'd say that's okay.
Okay. I have a question that's directed to me. So as a journalist, what was the worst response to a crisis I've received, and what made it so bad? The worst response was I was threatened. And would I want to feel the wrath of the company? And me as a small player, would I want to go against a large company? It's about data protection. And I found reams of private, confidential, personal information in a dumpster. I went dumpster diving and I found reams of information like this, this was many years ago. When I approached the company to say that this is what I found, they accused me of burgling their office, of stealing into their office, of lying, that the only copies of this information was the CEO and the secretary and everything else have been, shredded, and I had reams and reams of information to prove. Their lawyer, well, I had the breaking point was I had a very good editor who supported me and who led me through the process of writing the story and guiding me on what to write and what not to write. We did not say what company it was, but the PDA, the authorities, when they read the story, did ask me who this company was. And because it was law, I had to tell them who it was. So the entire information went to them.
What
So
a
that was, to
exciting
me,
life.
sorry?
What an incredibly exciting life you lead.
I don't need, I think one excitement in my life is that's all I needed. Okay, we've got a couple of other questions. Okay, this question from Katrina. If you have been brought in at the last minute to handle crisis comms for an event, how do you go about building trust with that client as you navigate the crisis together? So I suppose it is not a client that you've worked for, but you're brought in at the last minute. How do you go about creating that trust? Neil?
Yeah, I think if you were brought in last minute, obviously it happens in crisis situations. It may be a client for which they don't have, an agency and on retainer, for example. So I think it important as an agency, what's important for me is an alignment in with the business, making sure that okay, am I really qualified to be handling the situation? Like if it's a cybersecurity company, I want to make sure that I've dealt with cybersecurity situations because like we've established earlier, experience is pretty important in these, types of situations. So I'd have that alignment first because once you've established that, I wouldn't worry too much about not having worked with a client for too long because you've got that experience who could potentially help them in that situation.
Okay. I think Shamin says that you want to build, or well, one of you, Serena, Shamin said that you want to bring in an external voice for the objectivity and a new ear and a new pair of eyes, a fresh pair of eyes. Is this all that's about to it, or are there more things? Serene? Sorry, go ahead, Shamin.
I was just going to say that it's not just objectivity and an outside pair of eyes and ears. It's also the fact that in an agency, you have 4 or 5 people probably working on it. So collectively, you might have 100 years of experience. On top of that, they might have seen something like this happen in the past. So they bring a level of experience that you might not have. So I really, really appreciate an agency and an outside viewpoint. That to me is something that you really do need to have.
Okay, Serene?
I would agree with that, and also I would, depending on the room, right? Who are the senior stakeholders that you have on the client side? I would ask if the agency can similarly bring in somebody who has that level of clout, a bit of gravitas, people who have the experience and not only their rookie team.
Okay, all right. Here's I think we are running out of time, but here's a last question from the audience. Can you share the key steps of the recovery plan in the playbook? Neil?
Yeah, I think, I'll always go back to that component on trust. Trust from the perspective of you like investing in long-term trust about the business, right? So it's not just something that you activate when a crisis happens. You want to establish that trust that would be very helpful in a situation like this because I mean things happen, you commit you take missteps. There are situations like Serene said where you have to say sorry, but once you've established that trust, that gives you a path to kind of go back to what you are ought to do really. And so I think that would have to be an important element of, that playbook that there's a trust component, there's a building trust component to everything that you do so that,
Okay.
when a crisis happens, you could, go back to the path easily.
Okay, there is a question I would like to make an exception to this lady from Oman, I don't know, Nai Kiang from Cambodia market. Her question is, do we really need to respond to the media in a crisis and how to define if the size of the news is big or small? Shamin, you want to quickly address this and then we can move on.
I think always respond, never not respond. I think you shouldn't ghost the journalist. You need to build relationships, and in order to build relationships, respond.
Okay, and how do you define the size of the news is big or small? That means big story or small story?
That goes back to the playbook. And I'm sure Serena and Neil will all agree on this one. The playbook defines how, whether it's a crisis or whether it's in your imagination, whether it's catastrophe. So
But whatever it is, you should respond, and then you should always, it doesn't matter whether you think that the news is small or big, right? But you should respond.
yes, that is my personal mandate. And it's my philosophy to always respond.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think
Well,
it's
thank
a
you.
common courtesy anyway to just get
Yes,
back. Yeah.
it is. It is. Okay. Well, thank you for the audience attendees for your questions. Before I close, just the final thoughts from the panelists today. What is the one piece of advice for PR practitioners that would help them manage crisis? So maybe we'll go to the thorn first, Neil.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, it's a common theme of the conversation, which is really just be prepared and anticipate, because just anticipate everything will happen. And I think we do this a lot as PR agencies, where, when before you get into an interview, you have red flag questions. What's that one thing you don't want to be asked, but if you're asked, you have an answer for? So preparation is just key
Yeah.
for.
I often in interviews, often the PR person who'll be sitting next to me would that be at the back suddenly say, no, 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 no. Charmaine, what will be your final piece of advice?
I think extending that be prepared. One of the first things that I do when I've joined an organization is say, do you have a risk management matrix? And a lot of times, not a lot of times, but 80% of the time, they don't have one. So take it upon yourself. The first time, in the first few weeks when you're first learning about a new organization, you have time. So do that.
So risk management will be the areas that can give rise to a crisis.
Yeah, and a lot of times, comms people, we're not just PR folk trying to sell, trying to talk about a new product or happy stories. We're also the risk management officers, I think, and I think you need to think about that when you take on a comms role.
Okay, Serene, final piece of advice.
Sure. So echoing what Shaman said, business continuity plan, and then deriving your own comms plan that supports that, and making sure that comms really has a seat at the table, the leadership table, because when a crisis hits, you don't want to be the last person to find out. You want to actually have built that trust already with your leadership, with the technical experts, with HR, legal, and everybody else that comes into play, because ultimately you're the one who's going to be pulling these parties together so that the messages stay consistent.
I think that's a very important point. Thank you, Serene. So be part of that decision-making group so that you can find out information for yourself from the horse's mouth, so to speak. I think that everything that we spoke about today, all of you have come back to the same thing, is that you must have a playbook. And in that playbook, you have a list of contact people, the key stakeholders, what are the things that can go wrong, and then you need to drill. And you need to drill on those things that can can lead to a crisis. As Shami put it, you are the risk management person as well. Well, storytelling is easy when it's all about good news, right? Telling a negative story right that will protect corporate reputations is the best skill for PR practitioners for today's complex business environment. Thank you, Serene, Charmaine, and Neil, for sharing your experiences and insights. I apologize to attendees for not being able to answer the question on what were the memorable crises that the speakers have experienced, because it's sensitive, and please bear with us, right? To attendees, we hope that we have given you the insights and tips you can use to get that badge of honor and that promotion that you richly deserve. Thank you, and see you, all of you, soon. Thank you, Neil, Charmaine, and Serene.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Over to you.
Thanks, Grace. Thank you so much for leading the discussion. I believe, we all here, me included, we've learned a lot from Serene, Charmin, and Neil, your collective experience and stories and tidbits as well. Thank you, and we really appreciate, to our audience, we really appreciate your time. And we hope that you have found this session useful and valuable. If you would like to continue the conversation, feel free to if you want to reach out to some of the PRCA APAC Tech group members or some of our panelists here, so that we can continue talking because we're part of the same community of the tech PR professionals. With that, thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you at future sessions. Have a
Right.
good
Thank
one.
you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.